You're paying $2,000 a month for an apartment with a thermostat that doesn't work, while having a landlord who thinks maintenance request means something to ignore until March. But 40,000 years ago, an early human solved all three problems with just a cave, a fire pit, and animal dung. And honestly, their solution might have been better engineered than your landlord's. Many of you think of caves as dark, miserable holes where early humans huddled and shivered, but that image is absolutely wrong, because archaeological sites across Europe and the Middle East tell a completely different story. These weren't desperate shelters. They were renovated, intentionally modified, while some were even occupied continuously for tens of thousands of years. But you, on the other hand, don't even stay somewhere for 30 seconds unless you figured out a few things about comfort. So, how did prehistoric people turn raw rock into something that actually functioned like a home? Not a survival shelter, but a home. The answer involves way more engineering than you'd even expect. And it starts with something so obvious that almost everyone overlooks it. Choosing the right cave. First off, let's bust the biggest myth. Early humans didn't live in caves because they were dumb. They lived in caves because caves are thermodynamically brilliant. Here's a fact, which many of you don't know. The interior temperature of a deep cave stays remarkably constant throughout the year, typically between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on region. That's the case whether it's a blazing summer or the middle of an ice age winter outside. The surrounding rock mass acts like a thermal battery, which absorbs heat slowly and releases slowly. So, your modern insulation tries to mimic this effect, but a limestone cliff face does it for free. But prehistoric humans didn't just wander into any cave and call it home. They were actually very selective. For example, south-facing entrances were preferred across nearly every inhabited cave site in Europe. Why? Because maximum sunlight penetration happens during winter months. The sun sits lower on the horizon in winter, which means its rays reach deeper into a south-facing opening. This isn't accidental, because this is the same passive solar principle that architects charge you thousands of dollars to implement today. But wind direction mattered too. Sites like Abri-Pataude in France and Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar share a common trait, which are natural wind barriers. Overhanging rock, narrow entrance corridors, L-shaped passages. The geometry of the cave itself broke incoming wind before it could reach the living area. But then there's water. A cave right next to a river sounds great, until that river rises in the spring and floods your home while you're asleep. Early humans figured this out fast. Almost every cave site we've found sits up high, close enough to water to drink from it daily, but far enough away so that a bad storm wouldn't turn their living room into a swimming pool. These weren't random picks. Cavemen were reading landscapes the way a modern engineer reads blueprints. Maybe even better, because an engineer gets to redo the math. But if a caveman picks the wrong cave during an ice age, his whole family freezes. Therefore, the stakes enforced precision. But picking the right cave was only half the battle, because once you're inside, you've got a new problem. The fire problem. Now, here's where most people's understanding falls apart. Everyone knows cave people used fire. What almost nobody realizes is how precisely they managed it. You can't just light a bonfire inside a cave. If you want, you can try it, and you'll smoke yourself out in minutes. Carbon monoxide gets accumulated in enclosed rock chambers. It doesn't rise neatly through a chimney because there is no chimney. Early humans figured this out, probably the hard way. Therefore, they developed strategies that are genuinely impressive. At Theopetra Cave in Greece, one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites on Earth, archaeologists found fire pits positioned in very specific locations. Not the center of the cave, not the deepest, warmest point. Right near the entrance, in the transition zone, where natural airflow created a slight breeze. Warm air from the fire rose and pulled fresh air in behind it. This made it a natural ventilation loop. Therefore, no chimney was needed. And the fireplaces themselves weren't just holes in the ground. At many prehistoric sites, including several in France's Dordogne Valley, researchers found evidence of constructed fire pits, stone-lined deliberately shaped, sometimes with reflector walls built behind them. Those stone walls weren't decorative. They bounced radiant heat deeper into the cave, toward the sleeping areas. Imagine a satellite dish, but for warmth. That's not primitive. That's physics being exploited by people who had never heard the word physics. But fire wasn't just for heat. At multiple sites, researchers found evidence of smoke being used to manage insects. Controlled, low-burning fires with green wood or damp vegetation produce thick smoke that drives out mosquitoes, flies, and other pests. This wasn't a side effect. The fuel choices were deliberate. Different fuel for warmth, different fuel for pest control. That's two separate fire management strategies operating inside the same living space. So, after they've got the right cave and mastered fire, you'd think that's enough, right? It's not. Because there's a problem hiding under their feet that nobody ever talks about. But the way they solved it is almost disturbingly clever. Floors, walls, and pest control. Bare rock floors are brutal because they are cold, uneven, and about as comfortable as sleeping in a parking lot. But early humans fixed this too. At multiple sites across Europe and Africa, excavations have uncovered thick layers of deliberately placed bedding material, grasses, leaves, bark strips, and animal hides, each layered on the floor in sections. At Border Cave in South Africa, researchers found bedding layers dating back 200,000 years. These weren't random piles. They were compacted, arranged, and periodically burned and replaced. But that last detail is critical, because burning old bedding destroyed insect infestations. Ticks, lice, mites, all gone. Then fresh material was laid down. This is pest control. 200,000 years before the first bug exterminator ever printed a business card. But they didn't ignore the walls either. At several caves, researchers found signs that people hung animal skins across the entrance, like a curtain. At Lazaret Cave, there's a row of holes in the ground near the opening where wooden poles once stood. Those poles held up a wall of animal hide. Why? Because it created a pocket of dead air between the cold outside and the warm inside. At this point, you'd think they've covered everything, but there's one silent threat that could undo all of it overnight. Water management. Here's a problem you've probably never considered. Caves are wet. As water seeps through rock, therefore it drips from ceilings. It pools on floors. And sitting in permanent dampness will kill you just as effectively as cold will, just slower and with more misery involved. But prehistoric cave dwellers dealt with this. At several sites, researchers found drainage channels, shallow grooves carved or worn into cave floors that directed water away from living areas toward natural exit points. At Denisova Cave in Siberia, one of the most important prehistoric sites ever excavated, the main living chamber shows signs of deliberate floor modification. Areas were leveled. Even low spots where water pooled were filled in. Natural drip. Points inside caves provided a reliable freshwater source without ever leaving the shelter. At some sites, stone basins were placed beneath consistent drip points. Passive water collection. No plumbing required. No trip to the river in freezing weather. Just gravity doing its thing while you stay warm. Now, everything I've told you so far, the heat, the insulation, the water, that's survival. What comes next is the part that changes how you think about these people entirely. Cave art, not just decoration. This usually gets overlooked. We talk about cave paintings as art, and they are art. But several researchers have pointed out something interesting. Many painted caves show signs that the art served a functional role in the living space. At Chauvet Cave in France, one of the most spectacular painted caves ever found, the artwork is concentrated in deeper chambers, not the areas where people actually lived. The living spaces near the entrance are relatively plain. The painted chambers appear to have been special purpose spaces, for example, a ritual, communal gathering, storytelling. We can't know exactly, but the separation is deliberate. Living room here, gallery there, now. After everything you've just heard, this is the part that's going to stick with you long after this video ends. We call these people cavemen, like it means dumb. But look at what they actually built. a thermally stable shelter with passive solar orientation, managed ventilation, pest-resistant bedding, and water management, using nothing but stone, bone, animal hide, and whatever grew nearby. Meanwhile, modern humans with access to every material on Earth still produce houses with mold problems, poor ventilation, and heating bills that make grown adults cry. I'm not saying a Neanderthal cave was nicer than your apartment. I am saying the engineering principles were sound, and some of them were more sound than what passes for affordable housing today. But if this video still hasn't changed how you think about our prehistoric ancestors, don't subscribe.